He is the most famous unknown writer in Australian literature. A prolific writer with 53 book titles and over 3 million sales to his name. And yet, a name that to this day remains completely unknown in the country he loved and wrote about his whole life.
We've all had defining moments in our lives, be it meeting someone or being somewhere. But in my case, it was reading a book. Little was I to know, as a boy of 14, how much this book would influence me, and perhaps others, to head to Northern Australia in search of adventure, and ultimately reside there, happily for many years. The book was In Crocodile Land by Idriess, one of over 50 titles he wrote and published. So who was this guy? Put simply, he was a genuine Australian legend, serving as a light horseman in the First World War, an accomplished writer, true adventurer, and a visionary. Most certainly one of Australia's first influences.
Ian Idriess, better known as Jack, was born in Sydney in 1889 and raised in Broken Hill. Jack's early working life was spent in a number of trades in the western districts of New South Wales. He took on work in a number of itinerant jobs, including variously as a rabbit poisoner, a boundary rider, a drover, and a gold prospector.
Jack was raised in Broken Hill, which gave him first-hand experiences of life in a frontier mining town, where he also met Afghan camel herders and stockmen, and he loved hearing their tales of Northern Australia. He became fascinated about life up north from the tales he heard, and he wanted to experience it himself. So it wasn't long before young Jack was soon to travel to far north Queensland in search of riches and adventure.
Jack then moved further north, working in several tin mines in Cairns and Cooktown districts, and by 1913 he was living on the Cape York Peninsula, where he lived with an Aboriginal clan. He was a keen observer of Indigenous customs and lifestyle at the time, when such thinking was highly uncommon. These early experiences formed the basis of some of his most popular early books. In 1914, with the world gearing up for the horrors of the Great War, Jack returned to Townsville to enlist in the 5th Light Horse of Australia's Imperial Force. He was 25 years old. Jack was about to become an eyewitness to some of the key legendary moments of Australia's wartime history. He saw action in Turkey and was there at Gallipoli when he sustained serious wounds. Later, in the Sinai and Palestine, he witnessed and wrote about the charge of the Light Horse at Beelzebub, the last light horse charge ever made in war. And finally he was wounded yet again in the fighting after the Battle of Gaza. Idriss's wartime writings were immensely popular in a time when news about the war was slow and scant, often arriving months or years after the actual events described. His wartime diaries are today stored in the Australian War Museum in Canberra and can be read online. His book, The Desert Column, describing the war and his experiences in the Middle East as an Australian soldier, was eagerly snapped up by a population hungry to know more about this crucial period in our history.
The impact of the Desert Column was far-reaching, and it's still in print today. At the centenary commemorations of the Battle of Beersheba, the then Prime Minister of Australia, Malcolm Turnbull, read the following passage from the book. At a mile distance, their 1,000 hooves were stuttering thunder, coming at a rate that frightened a man. They were an awe-inspiring sight, galloping through the red haze, knee to knee and horse to horse, the dying sun glinting on bayonet points. The desert column will no doubt remain a legacy as a reminder of the horrors of war for generations to come.
His first novel, Madman's Island, was published in 1927 when Idriess was 38 years old. During the years of the Great Depression, Jack Idriess became a publishing icon. His tales of swashbuckling adventures and daring do helping to raise the spirits of the nation in bleak times. His books on opal mining and gold prospecting struck an especial resonant chord with Depression-era Australians, encouraging many to search for gold.
Australia was in a pretty bad place at that time, and the main thing Idriess did, and he was the main author that did it, was gave them some relief from ugly reality. He took them to wonderful places they'd never been, or probably never likely to go. He took them to the islands, to the mountains, to the deserts. He told them of the natives, the islanders, their stories, and he just made them feel better about themselves in very bleak times. That's what's made him popular. He wrote in a language the average person could understand, and they appreciated it. And his books were passed round and round, and he was by far the most popular author in those dark times.
He wrote on multiple topics, including travel, biography, history, anthropology, and more. His writing was generally non-fiction, but written in a narrative story style. A book called In Crocodile Land in 1946 introduced Southern audiences to an exotic, dangerous, intriguing, and largely unknown part of the country. This fascination would stay with him until the end of his life.
It was in Crocodile Land that inspired me to head north after school with my mate Andy, working first in the Pilbara, then on to Darwin pre-Cyclone Tracy, then across the top to North Queensland. I'm forever thankful to Jack for starting me on that journey, which led to many great adventures on land and sea, and also meeting unforgettable characters along the way. What an influencer he was for me.
His other published titles included The Cattle King, The Red Chief, Lassiter's Last Ride, Tracks of Destiny, Drums of Myrrh, The Wild White Man of Badoo, The Yellow Joss, and many more. Another popular title, 40 Fathoms Deep, was a true life adventure about pearl diving and life in Broome.
The Tasmanian academic Petrina Osborne wrote in her thesis, "The popularity of Idriess fiction and non-fiction demonstrated the interest of urban readers in the nation's settler heritage." Well aware of his potential influence, Idriess used his writings to persuade readers to develop a greater appreciation and awareness of uniquely Australian experiences and histories, both Indigenous and settler in origin.
Idriess wrote from real-life experiences, using knowledge he had personally gained by travelling extensively and working at a variety of occupations. He was a pioneer writer who captured the hearts and minds of millions of readers through the Depression years. and was amongst the very first Australian writers to bring stories from Australia's far north to eager city-bound readers.
Nicholas Rothwell wrote in the Weekend Australian, Idriess was an author well suited to his time, when Australia's true contours were still being traced out and its potential seemed unbounded. He chronicles life's ups and downs, but looks beyond them to the shimmering horizon line. He is a companion as well as a narrator. He seems to be walking through the northern landscape to this day.
Northern Australia was a lifelong topic for Idriess, and he challenged the conventional thinking of the time that largely ignored the north of the country. His final work, written at the age of 79, was called Challenge of the North, and elaborated on many of Idriss's ideas for developing Northern Australia. Although Idriess remains largely unknown to the general public, book collectors have long searched out his titles, while first editions have become increasingly sought after, with values increasing markedly.
Jim, how many other collectors do you reckon are out there?
Good question. Hundreds, if not thousands. Still the most collectible author in Australia today, but very hard to get them together. So it's hard to determine actually how many are out there.
Right. And what do you reckon makes him so collectible?
He writes on Australia that no longer exists. And my theory is if you don't know what our history was and how we thought and acted, how in the heck are you going to know why we are what we are today?
Apart from his popular novels, Idriess is also highly regarded for penning the biographies of several significant Australians, including his first bestseller, Lassiter's Last Ride, in 1931, about the famous gold prospector and miner Flynn of the Inland. The 1932 biography of John Flynn, founder of the Royal Flying Doctor Service, one of his most enduring titles. In 1941, Idriess wrote the story of Numaraluk, King of the Wilds, which told the story of a great Aboriginal warrior who proudly defended his lands against intruders. Idriess had actually met Numaraluk twice. The story was reprinted in 2016. Idriess was awarded the Order of the British Empire, the OBE, in 1968. He passed away on the 6th of June, 1979, at the age of 90, at Monavale, in New South Wales. Though famed and acknowledged in his lifetime, Idriess has slowly been forgotten over the passage of time. He was the first to write on so many topics and brought knowledge and information to a country that was eager to learn more about its more distant and less settled corners. His reputation deserves to be more widely known today, along with being recognised as one of our first influences.
And they reckon. So I had to do something. And of all things in the world, all I could think of was I used to make a few bob from the Bulletin and Power, so I started freelance time against all you bloody professional artists and editors and all you great big literature blokes. I battered in, and I made a living in the heart of that awful depression when a lot of poor blokes and some editors among them was carrying their swags away to look for gold in worn-out gold fields. It was a terrible time, that depression. I hope to God never, never, never comes again. And I'm just if I didn't make a living.